Hey everybody, my name is Zach Smith. I am a district instructional specialist out in Sanger Unified School District. It's a little bit about myself. I'm overall a guy who loves universal design for learning. I really think it's the tops. I'm also a goofball, so that's a fact. Anybody who knows you knows me knows that. I work out in Sanger Unified, a district in Central California. Uh, you'll also see these are my contact information. So if you want to get a hold of me or if you have questions, then that's a place to reach me. I also, for the purposes of our screencast, have set up a Padlet that'll allow you at different times during our session together to actually go and on a shared space, answer questions, give feedback, tell us what you're working on. Let me show you what that looks like really quick. So here's our Padlet. And within our Padlet, there's a place for you to leave questions. There's a place for you to give your reactions. There is a place for goals, a place for you to write down or type in links or your actual assessments, materials and methods. And then here's a bunch of resources that you'll find all around Universal Design for Learning. So it's super awesome, super helpful. I love Padlet and hope that you love it too. So I'm going to go back to our Prezi and we're going to keep moving in with our presentation today. So, like I said, my name is Zach. Hello. Now we're going to jump in and look at our goal for today. So our goal is to be able to design lessons that support a varied array of learners. That's what universal design for learning is. It's literally in the name. We want to universally design teaching. So teaching that opens as many doors as possible so that as many different types of kids, different kids, different support needs can make it into our instruction and understand what it is that we're trying to teach. So the analogy that I like to use, that lots of people like to use when I'm talking about UDL, is to use the analogy of building. So if you think of ADA compliance or universally designed structures, you're thinking of structures that have thought of the needs of people on the forefront when they designed the building, right? So if you put a building together and it just has stairs, then you sure are going to have some folks that are going to be able to make it into that building, no problem. But you're also going to have a whole other component of our population that can't make it into your building, like someone who is pulling a hand truck, or someone who was just injured and got one of those fancy scooter things that they're kicking around on, or somebody that is pushing a stroller, or someone in a wheelchair. So designing buildings, designing places and spaces so that we think of all the people makes for really, really great places to be in. And so we're thinking also that way in terms of instruction. So if I have a standard here, I'm going to try to design how I assess that standard and how I teach that standard in as many different ways as possible so that I can capture as many different learners as possible. All right, so let's get a little bit more. But before we get into the how to do universally designed lessons, I want to talk a little bit about before you even leave the car, right? So before we even leave the car, we've got to know about this stuff. The things we need to know about first and foremost is relationships matter, both in terms of your kids, and hopefully we'll prove a little bit of that today as we talk about engagement, but also in terms of yourself and leaning in to a team. So we love PLCs out in Sanger Unified. We think that they're super helpful and great ways for teachers to learn and teach and plan together to see kids thrive. And so it's important for you to remember that the relationships really, really are helpful in all facets of your professional life. And really, we know this in our personal lives as well. Setting high expectations. So to begin with, universal design for learning is not dumbing things down. It's not making content less rigorous. And that is actually a misconception about universal design for learning. And hopefully today we can disprove that misconception. But we're really trying to set super high expectations. We're just open with how those expectations get met. But the rigor and the depth of knowledge and the levels of understanding that we are trying to meet are in fact really high. And so the last thing that you need to be able to do before you move and get out of the car and start designing is to understand fundamentally what UDL is. And so let's spend some time talking specifically about universal design for learning. So the first foundation of universal design for learning is embracing learner variability. What this means is our students' needs and their support needs actually are the things that have the potential to make us better, to make our systems better, and just overall for awesomeness to happen. And hopefully I can prove it to you with a little story. So my clicker works. I want to tell you a story about Bespoke Innovations. They are a 3D printing company that focuses specifically on prosthetics. Think medical 3D printing. And so these folks, they 3D print, design prosthetics, but they do it in such a way where they think about the user. So they think about the people who are missing a limb, and they design that limb to meet the lifestyle preferences, interests, design ideas of that person. So think if you had a tattoo and let's say you got in a motorcycle accident and you lose your leg from the knee down, they'll 3D print a prosthetic limb for you, a leg that continues that tattoo that you had prior to being in your accident. Or, they have folks that have wanted fishnet stockings, or folks that have wanted a carbon fiber black kind of think sleek matte finish arm. They design around what the people want. And so what happened was they had a group of gals, specifically with scoliosis, who were being confronted with having to wear these braces. And these braces were not only uncomfortable, but also really, really not aesthetically pleasing. And so the folks that were coming up to Bespoke said, like, hey, you all seem to be doing some really creative things in the way of prosthetics. Could you help us out by 3D printing something that we could wear that will also not be so not beautiful? And those were the words that they used. And rather than think first and foremost about the people that were coming to them, Bespoke did something kind of fun, where they thought, well, who are the populations of person that would never wear this brace no matter what, even if it meant that it would add 5 years to their life, or would correct their physical problems that they were running into. And they didn't go to these ladies, they went to these ladies, specifically teenage girls. And they thought, well, if we can sell this and pitch this to a group of people that probably the mainstream medical community is not designing towards, then and make them like it, make them be into it, then we might be onto something. And so what they did was they 3D printed a brace that would fit under people's clothing, and the user could pick the different colors, they could pick the different patterns, and they debuted it at a fashion show out in Paris. And the medical community was excited about it. They thought it was great. But the fashion community absolutely lost their minds, because this was one of the first groups that confronted them with the idea of 3D printed clothing. And especially with the amount of customization that was available, they were just freaking out. And so now we have an option that we can give to our first population, but because this population presented us with challenges, made us think outside the box, would not mold themselves to traditional ways of solving this problem, like they actually made the whole thing better. And you look at this across the board in terms of accessibility, options, and tech, and you see that the place where innovation is happening is oftentimes happening because we found a way to connect to a marginalized people group. And in doing so, we found just overall a better way to do stuff in life. And so that's a word picture there of what we're trying to get at with universal design for learning. We're trying to say historical models have said, well, the bell curve looks like this for humans, and most folks fall in the middle. So let's design something that is focused on the average person. But in doing so, we've actually looked at it incorrectly. So let me do it this way. In doing so, we've created this, think about going from not knowing to knowing. We've created this really narrow pipe of person that actually we didn't have to do it that way. So that's a really weird sentence I just said, but we've created a really narrow pipe that actually is pretty limited with who can get through it. But by thinking of first our marginalized people groups, the ones that we're having the most time accessing or the most challenge with how to grab hold of, we're actually creating a wider pipe, a more open experience that then more and more people can access. And I want to tell you a little bit more about it. Before I move on, though, there's a YouTube video on our Padlet that's called The Myth of Average. And so this is a video put out by Todd Rose that is absolutely like essential watching for someone that's wanting to learn about universal design for learning. Even so much so that I would say, pause what you're doing right now, watch this, and then come back to what I'm doing so that you can learn more. So feel free to pause it if you want to. We're going to keep moving ahead. The second foundation to universal design for learning is this whole idea of context, that context matters. The situations a person is placed in matter just as much as the skills the person comes with. So think about yourselves and think about whether you would call yourself gifted or not. Right? Now I'm going to change the context. So would you still consider yourself gifted if the context was completely dependent about your ability to feel comfortable and survive outdoors? Now, would you still feel at that same confidence level? What happens if I change the context and now your aptitude is dependent on your ability to write? Where would you fall? What happens if I change this context and I say now your aptitudes, your ability levels are dependent on whether you're able to read? Now I'm going to change the context. What happens if I said your competency is built on whether or not you're able to make a pitch at a business meeting to sell a multi-million-dollar product, right? What happens if I say change the context? Now you need to survive in school and you need to teach kids stuff. Maybe your aptitude or your competency changes. Maybe it's public speaking to a group of your peers. Think a room of over 300 people, right? Where would your aptitudes be? Where would your competency be in that context? The big idea here is that context matters. And that actually, if we looked at it this way, I'm going to play a little bit and see if I can figure this out. If we looked at it this way, that people have actually what's called a jagged learning profile. So if over here is whether or not you're high, and over here is whether or not you're low at something, right? So there are some contexts where you're going to be really high. There's some contexts where you're going to need help, support. There are some contexts where you're going to fall in about mid-range. And that's dependent on the day. That's dependent on how you're feeling. That's dependent on how much practice you've had. But either way, there are a lot of different contexts where you're going to fall either high, low, medium, or whatever. The reason why I'm kind of waxing on and on about this is because we see kids in just way too narrow of labels. So a lot of times we'll actually label kids as our high kids or our low kids. And yeah, sure, for maybe one context, they might need support. Or maybe for one context, they might be just really, really able to handle that context really well. But I guarantee you there are other contexts where they're going to flip-flop. And those kids that we call low kids, by doing so, a lot of times that low label follows them into contexts where they're not low. They're actually really, really skilled, really, really able in things like science, and things like technology and things like the arts. And yet, because they've been labeled low in education, this thing follows them. Same thing, though, is true for kids that are quote unquote high, because a lot of times that label will follow them and then they'll get to a context where they're really struggling. Let's say they're in high school math and suddenly the wheels are starting to fall off and they're not showing the same aptitudes, the same competencies that they did in middle school and elementary school. Now we've got to give that kid the opportunity to struggle, the opportunity to need remediation and support. So context really, really matters from a UDL standpoint, and is something that we're trying to work through when we are designing instruction. So it's something to keep in mind, and it is a foundation of the guidelines and understanding what UDL is. The other thing you need to remember is that context is going to make variability even more variable, because now I'm not just saying that a kid's needs are diverse overall, right? Or within one area, within just education. Now I'm saying even within education, there are contexts where a kid's going to need XYZ support here, ABC support there. And so it's really, really a diverse way to look at kids. Hopefully that makes sense. So the last foundation of universal design for learning is the whole idea of clear goals with loose means for attaining those goals. We want to have a clear, rigorous, grade level standard expectation of what kids need to be able to do. But in having that expectations, we want to be loose with how a kid meets those expectations. This ability where we have a goal, but then we give options for how kids meet that goal is a way to remove barriers. Because, for example, if I'm comparing and contrasting two different stories, and the only way I've ever been able to compare and contrast is by writing an essay about how the two stories are similar and different, then I've actually created a barrier for kids understanding, or for me understanding, comparing and contrasting, if writing is one of those areas that I really, really struggle. So first and foremost, we need to make sure the first goal is just to make sure kids get and can compare and contrast, whether they do it with their voice, whether they do it with Venn diagrams, whether they do it with infographics, whether they do it with essays, whether they do it with vlogs. Then once we know that they're able to capture and understand that concept in a myriad of ways, then we can have them apply that knowledge to an essay and then give them options within essay writing. But first and foremost, we're about having clear goals with loose means for attaining those goals. Let's take a look at this one here. A fourth grade standard, students will use place value understanding to round multi-digit whole numbers to any place. So what are the ways a kid could do that? A kid could do that by using a fancy app and recording or screencasting themselves, much like I'm probably bumbling my way through now. A kid could draw out each problem on a large poster. A kid could use their journal and write, someone on Facebook. Hi, Stacy. A kid could even answer the problem in a journal. A kid could use based in blocks. A kid could use a number line. Those are all ways that a student could show their understanding of rounding. We're giving them options. And think about also Common Core. Common Core is all about conceptual understanding. And so by teaching in a way where you've taught a concept in a myriad of ways, and we haven't gotten to that yet, but we will, and then assessing a concept in a myriad of ways, we're giving kids the opportunity to see that concepts are really, really diverse. And that something like rounding doesn't necessarily have to just be connected to the symbols that we oftentimes connect it to. It's a real life concept that can play its way out in a bunch of different ways. And so the whole reason for Common Core is that folks were coming to education, college, career, and they were saying, listen, we are getting kids that don't know how to generalize. They don't know how to apply what you've taught them beyond a simple multiple choice test. So we need to do something differently. It's not like Common Core is going away, because folks are all the time keeping Common Core and then just calling it something else. But also, it's not like this is just about supporting kids with disabilities. Universal Design for Learning is also about supporting kids who don't have disabilities, who really are just needing to learn different concepts in different ways, to experience them globally as they move through education. And that then helps them generalize and apply what they learn to whatever context they find themselves in. All right, so this is a great time to pause. Been doing a lot of talking here, and I want to pause now and let you go to the Padlet and you put some reflection ideas in about what you've learned so far. All right, so I'm going to get out of this, and I'm going to pause this.